Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Guru. Just a quick thank you for your guys' continued support, and a quick reminder to please subscribe. Subscribing will ensure that you stay up to date on content, and will also help support the channel in the cases that we cover. This week, we are actually bringing you two cases. These cases are in no way related and happened in two completely different cities at two different times. However, the circumstances regarding both of these young men's disappearances are very similar. And by that, I mean they both disappeared while they were simply just having a normal night out on the town, which is something that we all do. So this can make the cases feel really close to home, as it could really happen to anyone. I am calling this 2-episode series Gone with the Night. This is part 1, The Disappearance of Kyle Fleischmann. Kyle Fleischmann was your typical boy next door. Born in 1983, he was the first of 3 children to his parents, Dick and Barbara Fleischmann. The family lived in Charlotte, North Carolina throughout most of Kyle's life. Charlotte is a pretty trendy city with an abundance of nightlife. I have never personally been, but I have heard really great things. So it was no surprise that Kyle was drawn back there after graduating from Elon University in 2006. Kyle is described as an incredibly outgoing person who did not know a stranger. He made a lot of friends during his time at Elon, especially through the Kappa Alpha fraternity, which he was a part of. Because Kyle was such a positive, upbeat, and likable person, he was able to maintain these relationships after graduation. After moving back to Charlotte, like most people who just graduated college, Kyle was adjusting into real life, which, let's be honest, can be kind of a bummer. But Kyle was making the most of it. His degree was in business administration, so naturally he was looking for a job in business. But in a newly college graduate fashion, he was still kind of trying to figure out what exactly it is he wanted to do. Kyle ended up settling in with 2 roommates in a condo in the South Park area of Charlotte. He managed to obtain a pretty sweet job and had also just purchased his first new car. Family was very important to Kyle. He met with his dad, Dick, often for lunch and was very supportive of his mom, who was unfortunately undergoing treatment for breast cancer. In terms of romance, he was still young and just casually dating. Kyle did want something long-term in the future, but for now wasn't getting into anything too serious. He was in his 20s and just having fun, as he should. Of that fun, of course, included many nights out on the town at the bars. And the evening of November 8th, 2007 was no exception. In fact, there were a lot of reasons to go out that night, including Kyle's friend Dominic's birthday, as well as tickets to the Dane Cook comedy show. Dominic, Kyle, and several other friends all met at Kyle's college buddy's Daniel's house to head out for that evening's festivities. Now, this was way before Uber, and frankly, before we even had the technology to get an Uber. So the group all took a cab to what was known at the time as Bobcat Arena, where the comedy show was being held. Kyle's mom, Barbara, was also invited along to the show as a way to get her mind off of her cancer treatment, which just really goes to show how much Kyle cared for his family, even incorporating them into his social life. After the show, Barbara and Kyle's sister Noelle headed home, but the rest of the group wanted to carry the night on. So they went to a bar that was close by called Buckhead's Saloon. While there, being the social butterfly he was, Kyle managed to make some new friends and was seen dancing with a young lady. So around midnight, when the rest of the group started to fizzle out, Daniel asked Kyle if he was coming with him, But Kyle wanted to stay out a little longer. And of course, he was a grown man who knew his way around Charlotte pretty well. And everyone knew he wouldn't be driving home, so no one really thought anything of it. Kyle had actually left his car at Daniel's house. The next morning, when Daniel saw that the car was still there, at first he just thought that Kyle had found somewhere to sleep or had taken a cab home. But as the day went on and the car had not moved, Daniel became increasingly concerned. Naturally, he tried to call Kyle, but to no avail. The last thing Daniel wanted to do was worry Kyle's parents, so he really pulled out all the stops to find him. His roommates informed Daniel that Kyle had never came home and they had not heard from him either. He would also come to find out that Kyle did not go to work that day and even went to the gym to see if anyone had seen him. When none of these things panned out, Daniel knew that he had to let Dick and Barbara know that he was going to report Kyle missing. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg police took the report, but kind of gave the whole "he's an adult, he was drinking, I'm sure he'll turn up" spiel. So Daniel and Kyle's parents kind of knew that they were going to be on their own. Daniel had actually taken to Facebook, and even though it was still in its infancy, it had generated a large following. The Facebook page Help Find Kyle Fleischmann is still up and running today. Kyle's parents took a more active approach by hiring a private investigator pretty quickly. This PI was actually successful in tracking down some of Kyle's movements after the friends left Buckhead's. He was able to obtain some surveillance footage from the bar that showed Kyle engaging socially with a couple of guys and the young lady that he was seen dancing with. Apparently, there was some kind of altercation between Kyle and a couple of guys, one of whom is suspected to be the significant other of the girl. I wasn't able to find any specifics about this altercation, but we do know that the group separated from Kyle, and I didn't get the impression that it had escalated into something serious. Kyle left Buckhead's around closing time, so like 2:30. He had actually left his jacket and his credit card behind. Daniel told the Vanish podcast that it wasn't uncommon for Kyle to leave his card at bars. After all, I think we've all done it a time or two, myself included. However, since it was around 30 degrees Fahrenheit or -1 degree Celsius, a lot of people find it surprising that Kyle did not immediately go back in for his jacket once the cold temperatures had hit him. After all, he was only wearing a t-shirt. I actually don't find this too surprising. And the reason is because Kyle had been drinking, and anyone who partakes in alcohol consumption might attest that the cold doesn't really bother you too much if you've been drinking a bit. With that being said, there is some contingency on just how intoxicated Kyle was. He was in his early 20s and fresh out of college, and like most, he had been drinking quite often during this time. He was also 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, so combine his body mass with frequent drinking, I would have to think that his tolerance to alcohol would be pretty high. Daniel had been out with Kyle on many occasions and told the Vanish podcast that he couldn't think of a time when Kyle was so far gone that he was not aware of his surroundings. However, he may have been drunk enough to not have any concept of just how late in the night it was. So it could be possible that Kyle thought he would be able to return to Buckhead's for his jacket and credit card. After leaving Buckhead's, there was a street camera that caught Kyle crossing, but it didn't quite catch what direction he was headed. But it is speculated that Kyle was headed to an after-hours pizza joint called Fuel Pizza. And the reason that this is speculated is because an employee at the pizza place said that he specifically remembered Kyle coming in. Some sources did say that the employee had a self-proclaimed photographic memory, but I'm not sure if that's true or was just a form of hyperbolic speech. What gave Dick a good indication that this was Kyle was the employee described that Kyle ordered a pizza with everything on it. And according to Dick, that is just what he would order. He was definitely no plain Jane. You might be wondering how Kyle paid for the pizza if his credit card was back at the bar. But it is believed through bank statements that Kyle may have had some cash on him, but only like less than $10. This is where things get a little murky. However, the private detective was able to get a witness statement from a cab driver who says he saw Kyle leaving Fuel Pizza looking kind of confused. He says that he saw Kyle on North Davidson Street, which is reportedly kind of a sketchy area. I would also be remiss not to mention that during the time that Kyle left the bar and was seen by this cab driver, he had made a total of 8 calls, starting at 2:42 a.m. The last of these calls was timestamped at 3:38 a.m., which was around the time of the cab driver's sighting. What's weird about these calls is that they did not last very long. Kyle had called his dad, his sister, and some friends, but most of these calls were under 10 seconds. Some not even leaving enough time for the phone to even ring on the other end. It is presumed that Kyle may have been looking for a ride, but no one actually knows the purpose of these calls because Kyle did not leave any messages. The phone is believed to have been powered off or have died around 4 a.m. With this new information, everyone at least had a relatively good idea of where to search for Kyle. There was a citywide search that took place on November 14th, 2007, that was facilitated by the fire department. I believe it was during this search where scent dogs were brought in to trace Kyle's steps. The dogs traced Kyle's scent to 2 places on North Davidson Street. One was a park that is known for gang activity called Cordelia Park. The second place was a construction site nearby. And it was at this construction site where one of the dog's handlers noticed a very pungent smell of human decomposition. However, no body was found, unfortunately. And it is worth mentioning that residents in the area made complaints to police about a similar smell during this time. Dozens of more searches were conducted, including aerial searches, but unfortunately, Kyle Fleischmann is still missing. Which leaves everyone wondering, where is Kyle Fleischmann? The main theory in Kyle's disappearance is that he had walked into Cordelia Park and someone had caused him harm and then dumped his body at the construction site. Like I mentioned, the park has a very bad reputation, and I of course wanted to check this out for myself, and believe me, the claims are substantiated. I even found an article about a shooting that took place at the park earlier this year. So as far as I can tell, it was and still is not the best place to find yourself late at night. Perhaps Kyle had walked into the park and stumbled upon some unsavory characters. The theory is that robbery was the motive, and either the perpetrators got angry when they realized that Kyle did not have any money, or killed him because Kyle had fought back. It's also possible that Kyle may have witnessed some illegal activity and was killed because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. There are some things that make this theory very possible. An anonymous letter had surfaced that detailed that Kyle was killed in the park and then put into a hole at the construction site. And then when workers discovered his body the next day, they covered it up because they didn't want any involvement with law enforcement. I personally have doubts about the latter part, but that may just be me wanting to have faith in humanity. Also, when that citywide search occurred, A man who was experiencing homelessness had told one of the searchers that he witnessed gang members kill Kyle. I'm not sure if this is 100% confirmed or if it was even looked into. However, I feel that law enforcement may have had a bias about this man's situation, or maybe thought that they would not be able to locate him. However, if there's anything I know about people who are experiencing homelessness, at least in my city, they tend to hang around the same places and probably see some very unsavory things. I think it's very possible that this man's testimony may have been a very good lead, but perhaps was not looked into simply because he was homeless, and the biases that go along with that. The construction site now houses a living community called Edgeline Flats on Davidson. The owners of the property did not allow any private searches, but in 2009, a judge did issue a search warrant for the property. It is worth noting that, according to TrueCrimeWire.com, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, or the ATF, was involved in this search, which would be consistent with gun violence and gang-related investigations. Interestingly enough, the results of this search were sealed by a judge, which could mean that something of interest related to Kyle's disappearance was found that may be important to the investigation. It is also possible that the documents are sealed because evidence unrelated to Kyle was found. Perhaps evidence related to a different investigation, maybe into organized crime. Another theory is that Kyle was murdered, but not related to gang violence, but perhaps associated with the employees of Fuel Pizza. The Vanish podcast spoke to Kyle's uncle Steven, who has experience in law enforcement. He told them that some of the employees of Fuel Pizza have criminal records, which include assault and weapons charges. He also mentioned that one of them actually lived on North Davidson Street, and that some unrelated warrants have been issued for that residence. Is it possible that one or more of the employees saw intoxicated Kyle and thought that this might be a good opportunity for robbery, but then something went wrong and Kyle was murdered? Homicide detectives did later conduct an interview with one of these men while he was incarcerated for an unrelated offense, but as far as I know, nothing came of this interview. You may notice that I said homicide detectives, and that is because homicide was investigating Kyle's disappearance at some point, but it's unclear as to when and why they were investigating as opposed to a missing persons detective. As in all missing persons cases, some may speculate that Kyle left on his own volition or may have committed suicide. I don't think that either is likely, considering what his mother was going through. Barbara was actually scheduled to have surgery a few days after Kyle's disappearance, and given what we know about him, I just don't think that he would have done that to his family. He was also just getting his life started and had no financial problems, relationship problems, or anything that would make him want to disappear or leave this world. The only thing that might give suicide some weight is Kyle was at least some level of intoxicated, and alcohol is a depressant. But even with that considered, I don't think that this is what happened to Kyle, and neither do law enforcement. Last month marked 16 years since Kyle Fleischmann's mysterious disappearance, and unfortunately the case does not look that much different than it did on November 9th, 2007. The reminder of Kyle became too painful for Dick and Barbara, and they no longer live in North Carolina. Dick told Ken Garfield with Charlotte magazine that they have nothing against the city, but, quote, "When someone says Charlotte, I get a sick feeling," end quote. Kyle's loved ones do not believe that he is alive and are not hopeful that there will be any kind of justice in his case. They do, however, remain hopeful that his remains will be recovered and they can finally put him to rest. At the time of his disappearance, Kyle was 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. He was white and had brown hair with green eyes. Kyle was last seen in a black t-shirt, jeans, and black dress shoes. His phone and car keys remain missing along with him. If you have any information about the disappearance of Kyle Fleischmann, you are encouraged to reach out to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department at 704-334-7600 or the Charlotte Crimestoppers at 704-334-1600. Thank you everyone for watching. Kyle's story was just part 1 of a 2-part series called Gone with the Night. Part 2 is available to watch now and is conveniently located in the episode description. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and please remember to subscribe. While you're at it, please follow the channel on all social media platforms where I do openly welcome commentary and case suggestions. You can also submit a case suggestion by emailing me at truecrimeguruchannel@gmail.com.